Welcome back to the Ripe Wave Audio community. My name is John, and for this video, we continue our Home Theater Amplifier Series 2022, and this time it's Emotiva with all its models available this year in its BasX range and the Xpa Gen 3 range, including the Differential Reference models. And we'll even cover some discontinued ones as well. This series all started with the Monolith series from Monoprice, and we will cover a few other of the popular home theater standalone amplifier separates from Parasound, from OSD, and others such as those carried by the major brands like Anthem and Marantz and Yamaha. So this is going to be a long video. We have over 50 slides to cover. I'm going to try to do this as in short a time as possible, but I love to give you some details here. So these are models that range from $449 from the BasX A2 all the way up to the Xpa Dr3, which is $2,199, as well as the Xpa 11, which is the same price. So this whole series, let's start off with the BasX range. Now, Emotiva, what they've done is, try to create an entry-level series of amplifiers that is still a step up from what you might get in an AVR, audio visual receiver. And what they've done is they've given you models all the way through. So you've got 2-channel, 3-channel, 4, 5, 6, and 7-channel models in the BasX, and you can put these together in combinations depending on where you want to fill in. Do you want to complement what's already in your AVR? You want to upgrade your front channels? Do you want to cover down some channels that are not included in the AVR? They have more processing than built-in amplifiers. This could be easily done with the BasX series. Now, one point I'll make, it's kind of interesting. When you pull down the manual from the Emotiva website, they talk about an A1 model, but I couldn't find any reference to it on the active website, nor could I find anything out there on the general internet. Perhaps some of you out there knows what became of the A1. Is that a future proposed vaporware, what have you, or did it get released and I just didn't notice? But anyhow, the first model that we are covering here is the BasX A2, and this comes in at $449. This gives you 2 channels, and it will only take unbalanced inputs, so no balanced. But that's pretty good, because a lot of these AVRs, all they give you is unbalanced outputs on the preamplifier section. So this is a like match if you're adding it to an AVR. And so this gives you 2 channels at 160 watts. We'll tell you what those mean and what impedance and etc. that those are geared for. But this whole series pretty much looks the same, and we're going to cover this pretty quickly as we go through each of these physical pictures. Then we're going to bring up the comparison charts and we'll go into more detail. But this was the A2, and we can look inside these, and you can see this uses a toroidal transformer, and it looks very clean and very neat for an entry-level amplifier. And moving along, the A3, this is obviously 3 channels, and you can just see the extra set of input and binding posts there. So you just keep tacking these on. You got 3 blue LED lights on the front now instead of 2, which goes through a status sequence. When you start up the Emotiva, it gives you a sense of if there's any problems with those amplifiers as it starts up. There is no LEDs as they were in a couple of the early models. These are just a status indicator. And the A3, the inside is very much the same, and but this is giving you 3 channels at 140 watts. And these, by the way, all came out in 2021, this BasX series, except for one model where it was just introduced this year. We'll get to that in a bit. So the A4, now you got 4 LED lights in the front, 4 sets of binding posts, 4 sets of inputs. Looking inside, this is pretty much the same. You can see that circuit board clearly has 4 sections in it in this case, and 4 binding posts on the back. Going to the A5, 5 channels. Now this is coming in at $599, and these are going up a modest amount between models. I mean, in essence, you're moving up $50 between the A2, the A3, the A3, and the A4. $50 each increment for an extra channel. I think that is a good value there. So you have the A4 at $550, as we said, and looks very much the same. The A5 at $600. Again, we're moving up just $50. This time at 95 watts per channel. You do lose as you add channels. You're not getting as much output per channel, and so that is the trade-off of using that common power supply. There's only so much of that supply available for the amplifier modules, so you do decrease your output levels, but in some cases you don't need a lot. Maybe your ceiling speakers or your surrounds don't require as much as your front, and these would be ideal to fill in those channels. And looking inside of the 5-channel model, again, the circuit board now has 5 discrete areas. And then the next one is the A6, and this is the new model for 2022. There was a jump before. They went 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, and now they fill in the 6. I think 6 can be very useful. If you're doing 6 ceiling speakers, this could just be all your heights, all in one amplifier at 90 watts per channel. So that and those are usually even unless you're doing the voice of God. So it is good to have some even counts as well as odd counts depending on what you're doing for your immersive surround sound setup and layout. And you can see here now as we move from the A5 to the A6 inside, it looks like that power supply is getting a little beefier, but we're going to do a comparison slide so you can see that a little better. So this is at $650, still jumping up in $50 increments. Let's look at the A7 and see if that is, yes, $700. So again, another $50 jump. This is 7 at 90 watts. Getting kind of full in there. You got the 7 LED lights on the front to show the status. And inside, things could, of course, move around a little bit to get those extra channels in. That board just keeps growing inside there for another set. And that completes the basic line. So they take you from 2 to 7 channels, and there's a lot there to play with. Now, what comes in is the Xpa Series. So this is their upper end, and it's very modular. So you'll see in here that they have what they call stereo modules, which will give you the 2 sets of outputs. So you can do 2 speakers, a left and a right, with 1 stereo module. That's only used in a couple of base models. But mind you, they also have a build your own configuration. You can start with the chassis and put in which modules that you would like in the order and combination, as long as it doesn't exceed the number of slots and what the power supply is capable of powering. So you've got the Xpa high powered module. So this is a step up from the stereo, but that high power module is only going to do 1 speaker. So 1 channel with the high power model versus the stereo one does 2. But you have typically twice as much output with it. And then finally, the Xpa Differential Model, which we'll see a little later on with the DR models. And so this is giving you fully differential internally, not just with the XLR um, input on the back of this. This is true end-to-end, fully balanced when you use these modules. And of course, you can see the power supply. Looks like I got the same picture in there twice, but that's the other power supply that's used in this modular chassis. So let's take a look at the Xpa Series. And it starts with something that looks kind of small, and this is the HC1. So HC1 is $479. It gives you one channel, and that one channel is at 300 watts. So you get a lot of power for one channel. And this was introduced in 2019. If you want to use these in pairs so you can use it in a rack setup, they do have a chassis coupler kit. I think it's only $20. So this is the HCRE1, which is optional to group two of these together. And so this is using one of those high power modules in this smaller chassis. Now, and inside of it, of course, we want to look inside and how they fit this in here. And you can see how the power supply is right next to that single module. And there's not really any room to spare for these modular systems to taking another channel. So this chassis is really designed for one channel. Now we get to the Xpa Gen 3, because they've had other products in the past called Xpa, but this is the third generation. So this denotes this really modular system in this case, and there's using two high-powered modules in the Xpa Gen 3. These are rated at 300 watts apiece. And this was a 2016 introduction. And you can see the spare slots in there that are available. So if you ever choose to grow more channels in this, of course at the cost of losing some power output when you add additional modules. But this starts at 2 channels, 300 watts at $1,199. And to look inside of this, and I had trouble finding an inside picture of this. This is one I could find on the internet. I think it was from some group that was selling these online, either new or used. And but you can see that here it is with a sparsely populated 2-channel Xpa. And the power supply is up there in the front. And this is a switch mode power supply. And looking on to the Xpa 3 Gen 3. So now you've got 3 of these high power modules in the chassis. Of course, the power supply connection is over there on the left with a power on-off switch and a circuit breaker, and you're triggered in and out, which is traditional for all the Emotiva amplifiers. So this does 3 at 270 watts. Introduced in 2016, $1,399. And that's the Xpa 3. And inside, of course, no surprise here. Now you have those 3 modules starting to fill up more of the space inside this chassis. Looking on to the Xpa 5, there's no Xpa 4, but you could create one with the custom built option. So this giving you 5 channels at 250 watts. Also introduced in 2016, the Xpa 5 is $1,799. So you can see here the Xpa series is certainly more money than the BasX. And here is the inside of the Xpa 5. Looks like it's really starting to fill in a couple of extra spots here. Can we fit 7 in this chassis? And the answer is yes. So we see 7 LEDs on the front of this one. Every slot is filled with a high power module for the Xpa 7 Gen 3. And this is doing it at 200 watts per channel. And this it comes in at $2,199. And of course, here's the inside with every slot filled. And what's going through your mind is, how do they get 9 channels out of this, or even 11 if every slot is filled? Well, it's an easy answer because they have the stereo module that can go in here. Now, the stereo module does not have as much output as the high-powered module, but it lets you to get 2 channels out of 1 slot, and they do this for the same price as the 7-channel amp. Quite amazing. $2,199, also introduced in 2016. Now, this is 9 by 300 watts with an asterisk. We'll go over that later on because that isn't an all channels driven rating. So that's a 2-channel driven rating there. But you can see here on the ends, they've got the stereo modules, and the center 5 are the high-powered modules. 5 plus 4, that gives you 9 channels. And we don't have an inside view of either the 9 or the 11. I wish I did, but Emotiva does not post that, and I haven't found anybody else that has either. But with this picture of the stereo module there, you can use your imagination of what it would look like. Now, there's still only 7 LEDs on the front of the 9-channel, and you'll notice the same on the 11. So what they're doing is you're giving you a status per slot. So if a slot has a stereo module, that's only got 1 LED representing that stereo module. So in the 11-channel, the Xpa 11 Gen 3, you're using 4 of the stereo modules and 3 of the high-powered modules. And this is how you get to 11. So also shows a rating of 300 watts, but this is only at 2 channels driven. I haven't been able to see a Emotiva posting with all channels driven for either the 9 or the 11. So that's data I do not have. Now that takes you through the units that will do balance connections on all those Xpa models from Xpa 2 up to Xpa 11. But now we're going into the series where we're dealing with differential reference models and those that can be fully balanced. And I'm going to start with a couple of models that have been discontinued for comparison's sake. And I own one of those. Actually, I own 3 of those discontinued models. I don't own this one, which is the Xpa 1L. I understand this is kind of a rare one. It was introduced in 2013. Of course, discontinued by 2016 when they came out with the new series. But this gave you 250 watts into 1 channel, XLR, fully balanced, and it had a switch on there to switch between a Class A mode to a Class AB. So that first 35 watts, we'll see it on another slide with the exact number, would give you at Class A, and then it would automatically still switch over to AB, but if you put it in the AB setting, it would always use Class AB operation. It would never go into the Class A operation. Of course, the Class A is going to generate more heat, and it certainly does. I can heat my room with these 3 Emotivas in Class A mode. But this is kind of a half-height version of what I got. It's interesting that this one came out in the same year with the silver ends, which was really like the Xpa Gen 1 style. Xpa Gen 2 is like the next model. But before we look at the next model, this is the inside of the Xpa 1L. Toroidal power supply, these capacitors in there, big heat sinks, and this is a pretty beefy unit, and you can see the difference between this and some of the other ranges that we've seen so far. And when you get up now to the Xpa 1 Gen 2, also discontinued, these are the models I have. I have got 3 of these. And this was rated at 600 watts for that single channel. And unlike the other Xpas, these discontinued models were not modular. As you can see, there's no slots here. Everything has a distinct position on the back plane. And when you look inside of this thing, now mind you that these 2 units, the Xpa 1L, that was $699. That's a good value. And the Xpa 1 Gen 2 was $1,099. I actually got it on closeout for under $1,000. So that was a huge deal for these monoblocks built as fully differential. And we look inside of these, and these are quite populated. This is a lot different than the XPAs as we know them today. What's covered over there you can't see is the big toroidal transformer that's inside of this. So this was, again, 2013 introduction. Now, what has this been replaced with? Well, it's been replaced with the Xpa Dr1 for $1,399. Now, I think it's still a good deal, but this one's built a little differently. Now, this is giving you 650 watts for that single channel instead of 600. But this is done with a switch mode power supply instead of a toroidal power supply. And this is known as the Dr1, still fully differential, fully balanced. You'll see Emotiva refer to this in different ways. Sometimes they call it quad balanced, etc. But what this means is it's end-to-end internally doing that balance, as well as what's coming through the cable connection from the preamp. So that's what's meant by fully balanced. So this unit, looking inside of it, you can see how sparse this is compared to the old Xpa 1. Now, you've got the big switch mode power supply in the front, and you've got the differential module right in the center. Moving on now, let's look at a 2-channel differential, and this is with the discontinued Xpa Gen 2, which sold for $899, giving you 2 channels at 650 watts. And again, it's not modular. And looking inside this, and I have a terrible picture of this, but you can see it has a similar construction as the Gen 2 Xpa 1. So big capacitors and all that, and really using up the space. And these units were heavy, and we'll see that on some of the last slides. But these were replaced. This Xpa 2 was replaced by the Xpa Dr2. Differential Reference stands for DR. And that sells for today at $1,799. 2016 introduction. It's got 2 channels and giving you 550 watts for each of them. And you can see this is using 2 sets of the differential modules. And you can see that these use up 2 slots for each module instead of 1 like we saw in the other earlier parts of the range. Looking inside the DR2, we see how this really is filling in, and you can see there's still just a little bit of room left after the 2-channel using 2 slots. Now, an Xpa 3 was available in the Gen 2 as well, and here's some pictures of it. I don't have great ones. Emotiva's kind of removed all traces of the earlier Xpa series from their website, including the old manuals. I had to get the manuals from other locations, third parties, not from Emotiva themselves, at least from their website. But this was a 3-channel into 200-watt unit. Oh, they still had that same blue lights in the front, but this was replaced by the Xpa Dr3. So instead of being around $1,020, the Dr3 is $2,199. And this gives you 3 channels into 500 watts. So a lot higher output on the new Dr3 versus the old Xpa 3. And you can see this is using 6 out of the 7 slots. And we look inside of this, you can't put any more slots into this unit. This is fully populated when it comes to the differential reference modules. So you would need another 2 slots, not another 1. So this is fully populated. There won't be a DR4, at least in this chassis, in this hardware platform. Now, the Xpa Gen 2, they did have a 5-channel model at $999, 5 channels into 200 watts, but one might say, well, this could float a little closer to the other XPAs. And here we don't have a full down shot of that, but here's somewhat of an inside shot of that XPA 5. And that goes over all the models that, at least in the Gen 2 and the Gen 3, and we start looking at these together, and you can see how the BasX line, all uses that general layout with the toroid, the power supply, and the modules that just grow on a single board. They don't have a discrete individual board for each channel, but it's a board that gets larger and larger as you move from 2 channels to 7 channels, and these are all modestly priced, and they're all Class AB amplifiers. And we start to see the Xpa series at the bottom here with the HC1 and the Xpa2, and you can see that this gets more expensive as you go into that range, and the style is completely different, that modular, or using those modules versus that fixed layout of the BasX range. And then looking at the next grouping here with the Xpa 3, 5, and 7, you can see how that starts to fill in there when those modules, of course we don't have an inside shot of the 9 and 11, but it's using those stereo modules as we explained. And now we're starting to see some of the Xpa differential models, a couple that were discontinued. Those are the ones with the red background, right? So you have the 1 channel, the 1L, and just the 1. And you can see the difference between the 1L and the 1. The 1 was definitely a class higher than the 1L, but had some things in common there. And then the DR1 side by side with it. So you can see the 3 monoblocks and how different the layout is on all 3 of those. And then the last page, looking inside these units, the old XPA2 next to the DR2, and we don't have a picture of the XPA3, of course, but the DR3 and how that fills in as much as it can into that chassis, and the old XPA5, which was not replicated in the newest range. So that's the quick overview of what they look like. The general basically 3 ranges. I see it, they brand it as 2 different brands, but I split that XPA into 2, the standard Xpa Gen 3 and the Xpa Gen 3 Differential Reference as a separate range. But let's go back to the basics here, and we can see here that they're all RCA inputs. There are no balanced XLR inputs on the BasX range. These all have a standard impedance for the input of 27 kilo ohms. They give you a trigger in and a trigger out, which is very nice, because if you want to start daisy chaining these together, you don't have to split these out, or make sure you have a preamp or receiver that has lots of trigger outputs. You can just daisy chain these with that additional output that comes with. That's very nice. And you can see these stage, this is what I'm doing, you can see them stage on. Amplifier 1 comes on, then amplifier 2, and it doesn't put a big immediate load on your circuits as they come up to speed. Now this has got an input sensitivity rated at 8 ohms of 1.2 volts, except for the A3 for some reason is 1.25 volts. They don't rate it at 4 ohms. The amplifiers match the inputs of obviously 2 through 7 channels. Now the cost per channel, what gets exciting is the A6 and A7. You can essentially power up your whole system for $100 a channel. That's awesome, right? So you've got the 6 and 7 at $650 and $700 respectively, are giving you 90 watts per channel at $100 a channel with Class B AB amplification, and that is on par or better than what you find in an AVR in a lot of cases. These give you all a 29 dB gain, as you'll see throughout all of Emotiva's products, and accepting 4 to 8 ohm load impedance from your speakers. So they don't talk about 2 ohms or 16. Looking at the same specs here now for the XPA range, using the high-powered modules, on all of these, though some of them do have the stereo modules in it. And this gives you your 1 through 11 channels. And it gives you input impedance. Here they rate it differently versus balanced versus unbalanced because it has both types of inputs. So the unbalanced gives you 23.5 kilo ohms on the input impedance and 33 kilo ohms on the balanced channels. Still, you get the 1 in, 1 out on your triggers. Your sensitivity on your inputs, the HC1 has a higher sensitivity than the other models. This comes in at 1.7 volts versus all the other ones are 0.8 volts on your input sensitivity. So these are a little lower than some other amplifiers you'll find out there on the market. So yeah, make sure you're pairing this well with your amplifier. Cost per channel here ranges from $200 per channel up to almost $900 per channel. So obviously the 11 channel gives you your best value at $200 per channel. These are all class AB. These are all good, but so as long as you're getting the output that you're looking for from an amplifier, you could save money by going to the higher populated models. But mind you, that when you get into the 9 channel and the 11 channel, you're going to get different outputs. So we'll show that in the next grouping here. But again, like the BasX range, Emotiva is giving you they're giving you 29 dB gain for 4 to 8 ohm loads. And finally, the differential reference grouping here, you've got the same input impedance of 23.5 kilo ohms for the unbalanced, 33 kilo ohms for the balance, 1 in, 1 out on the triggers, just like all the other models. Input sensitivity does range here from 1.1 volt, which is coming in at the Xpa Gen 2 discontinued model, up to 2.4 volts with the XPA1 Gen 2. So the new DR1, DR2, DR3s are giving you 1.5 volts on the inputs. So they're all consistent there. The cost per channel here, of course, you're not talking about high density of channels, so you're not getting a lot of economy of scale. These range from what was $200 up to $1,400. But that included some discontinued models. So if we just look at the DR1, DR2, and DR3, that's giving you between $700, $733 a channel, up to $1,400 a channel with the DR1. So these are on the pricier side, but if you're powering some of your front main speakers, or you're really trying to keep quality all the way through, this may be worth it to you. These are fully balanced on these models. Of course, some of the older Gen 2 XPAs weren't fully differential. That's why they might fit in better against some of the other Xpa Gen 3s. And of course, they're 29 dB gain, just like all the other Emotivas for 4 to 8 ohm speakers. Now let's look at the next set of specifications and going back to the BasX line again. And we're seeing that these are measured, all channels driven into 8 ohms, and it goes from 160 watts with the A2 to 140 with A3, 100 with A4, 95 with A5, 90 with A6, and also with 97 at 90. For 4 ohm loads, this ranges from 125 watts per channel for the A7 up to 250 watts, with the asterisk because they did the measurement differently, and I don't like it when they do this. They did it with a THD of 1% versus 0.1%, which was they do most of their measurements at 0.1%. Why they switched over to 0.1 to 1% for this, I find annoying. But they do it for specsmanship. The signal to noise ratio on these are all 112 dBs, A-weighted, and then if you go to a 1 watt rating, that's 95 dB for all these. So all these are grouped the same with the same type of readings for all the channels in these. And you can see the cost per channel as we noted on the first the first set of specs. For the XPA range, using the high-powered modules, we're seeing that for the 8 ohm loads, the HC1 is giving you 300 watts. The XPA2 is giving you 300 watts. The XPA3 is giving you 270 watts. The XPA5 is giving you 250. The XPA7 is giving you 200. Now, one would think that the XPA9 and 11 would continue to drop down as you added the channels. Well, I think it does from an all channels driven perspective, but Emotiva is not giving you that spec. What they're giving you is 2 channel driven spec. So they put that at 300 watts per channel. Again, I don't like it when they do that. So be careful of that rating. It's 2 channels driven, not all channels driven. So one would imagine that the 9 channel is somewhere below 200. Maybe it's at 170 or something like that. And the 11 channels maybe at 150. Who knows, because they don't publish it. Of course, they do all this from 20 to 20,000 hertz. That's good. I like that. They do it for 0.1% THD. That's good. This is a good measurement range. The HC1, they also give you the 4 ohm load rating of 600 watts. They don't do that for the other products, although that's measured at 0.2%, 1.2. Those are fairly close. So the XPA 9 and 11 with the second grouping of amplifiers, so the 9 has amps 6 through 9, those are only 65 watts, 2 channel driven. And then the same with the XP 11 for channels 4 through 11, 65 watts, 2 channels driven. They do this measurement at 1K, 0.1% THD. So it's a 1K, not a 20 to 20,000. So if you did over 20 to 20,000, those numbers are going to be even lower. Maybe it's more like 50 watts. They don't tell you. I wish they would do all consistent measurements. And the signal to noise is less. It's 105 dBs for those other channels. So if that is a concern of yours, you may want to stay away from the 9, the 11 channel ones and relegate that more when you're really trying to be more budget conscious than trying to keep the quality at a certain level. And so these, as before, had that cost per channel listed there. Now, going into the differential reference side of things, the XPA1L, this is giving you 250 watts into 8 ohms. Now, if you put into the Class A mode, you're going to get Class A up for the first 35 watts before it switches over. Likewise, the XPA1, that's 600 watts into 8 ohms. And when you put into Class A, that's going to give you 60 watts. For the first 60 watts, give you Class A. And they're not doing this on any of the new models. You only get it on that Gen 2 XPA1 and the XPA1L. That aside, you still get a Class AB with all the other ones. The DR1 is 650 watts. XPA DR2 is 550 watts, and the XPA DR3 is 450 watts. And the older generation was a lot less on the 2, 3, and 5 on the output at 8 ohms. When you go to 4 ohm loads, the 1L gave you 500 watts. The XPA1s Gen 2 that I have give you 1,000 watts, which is the same as the XPA DR1. So those give you 1,000 watts per channel. And it's like, well, I ever need it. Now I have Polk audio speakers and they're not very sensitive, and they're 4-ohm speakers, and I see definitely goes above 500 watts on the meter. So I'm kind of glad I've got that much power behind them, and it's a fairly large room. These are all measured 20 to 20,000 watts, 0.1% THD. You're getting somewhere a range between 116 to 122 dBs, signal to noise, A-rated, and at 1 watt measurement, that's somewhere between 89 and 96 dBs. So all very decent performing units. And so, they moved to the DR2 with a different technology. You're still getting some good output on these. And I think it's reasonable that some prices have increased, and I don't think that's been gouging at this sense. Some people appreciate the fact that the newer models are lighter, and here we're starting to, on this last one is the physical side of things, and then the power side of things. You can take the time to pause this video and see the dimensions and the weights and everything. But the BasX series ranges somewhere between 25.2 pounds, 11.4 kilograms, and 28 pounds, 12.7 kilograms as you get more channels in there. So not a lot of range in there. These are fairly small height, only 4 inches, 102 millimeters in height. The depth is still pretty deep at 17 inches, 432 millimeters. These all give you a removable power cord. They're all giving you auto switching, a wide range of voltage. In fact, I probably didn't even do it just. I think some of these even go up to 250 volts, 110 to 250 volts. But whether, no matter what your voltage is in your country, this thing is auto adapting. Of course, they do perform better at the 240 volt if you can feed it that. And these are all toroidal based power supplies. Going to the Xpa series, you now move over to the switch mode power side, and they call this a Class H supply topology that they use. Voltage selection is auto. Voltage ranges, from 120 to 240, just like that, with a removable power cord. So all good there for every model that we see on this page. The weights here, now these are all the Gen 3 products. They range from 21.5 pounds and 9.8 kilograms all the way up to 53 pounds, 24 kilograms. So these are still quite heavy, even though they've moved to that switch mode power supply. But if we go to the next page and we see some of that Gen 2 stuff, we see some really heavy stuff. And these are using the toroids. So for the old Gen 2 stuff, you've got product there that weighed as much as 73 pounds, 33.1 kilograms, which is the units I have. And I do have to lift them up occasionally. So those were quite heavy. And then the new units, the DR1 is now the lightest of the differential. It's at 35.5 pounds, 16.1 kilograms, and of course it all ranges from there. But these are all full chassis except the now discontinued 1L, which was half height. And these are all like 19 inches, 394 millimeters deep. So these are the deepest models that Emotiva makes. Removable power supplies and all that. So you get the switch mode on the DR, the new DRs that are available today, with the Class H topology on the supply. So that covers all of those models. So what do you think? I think Emotiva has one of the most comprehensive home theater amplifier ranges. You can mix and match them. Some of you are not comfortable with the brand, and I do respect it, but the brand has done well for itself. They made a name for them in amplifiers. They represent a good value with some of the technologies that are found in a lot more expensive models, although they do get a run for the money with the likes of Monoprice Monolith, and we'll be doing a comparison in a future video. So what are your thoughts on it? Are you a BasX range? Are you a XPA? Are you differential? Do you see value in the differential reference series? That feedback would be useful to the Right Wave Audio community. And if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. And be sure to hit that bell icon you'll be notified when a video is posted. Until then, keep evolving your audio experience.